Hi, my name is Matt Rousu from Susquehanna University. Today, in the short video, I'm going to talk a little bit about laboratory versus field experiments, specifically for those who are looking to conduct experimental auctions. So as a setup of how to organize our thinking about this, I think it's really good to go to the paper on field experiments by List and Harrison. So this is a 2004 paper. And they put out a taxonomy that we're going to look at in just a moment. But they look at the difference between what is a laboratory experiment and what is a field experiment. And so this is directly a screenshot from their work, right? They're saying the nature of the subject pool. So are you dealing with college students? A convenience sample, a random sample? Like what is the subject pool? What information do the subjects bring into the task? What's being sold? What are the rules? What are the stakes? And what's the environment? Like, where is this being held? Within that, in their definition, they propose a taxonomy of saying, okay, there's kind of four different ways you could think about this. You could think about a conventional lab experiment, an artefactual field experiment, which is just a lab experiment but not using student samples. A framed field experiment, which would be similar. It's out in the field, and it's an experiment that's being done in a field setting, but participants clearly know they're in the experiment, which we'll discuss, and a natural field experiment being the fourth. Now, most experimental auctions would be in cases 1, 2, or 3. You could have some perhaps natural ones in actual auction houses, for example, where people don't know they're being part of an experiment, but of the ones that I know of, they're all 1, 2, or 3. So let's take a quick look at these differences. So a conventional lab experiment. So if you are doing an auction and it's considered a conventional laboratory experimental auction, it's going to be in a classroom type setting or boardroom, just like a normal room. You could be using computers to collect the data, or many of the times that I've done this, we've just done pen and paper, had people fill out their information on bid sheets and turn them in. Conventional lab experiments, it's with students. Now, there's a ton of control, right? Because everybody's in a room, and the experimental monitor and the participants, they're the ones in the room. So the experimental monitors and the experimenters can really control a lot of what's going on in there. The flip side of that, of course, it can be a bit sterile. And because you're in a classroom, this isn't where people are normally purchasing items, which makes it a little bit different. A benefit of a conventional lab experiment, people are in the room, they know they're taking part in this. You could go a little bit longer, 60 minutes to maybe even longer than that, right? These can last a while, which might allow you to get quite a bit of information. Now, with a conventional lab experiment, right, we're dealing with college students, so the participation fees can be pretty reasonable, right? Because the opportunity cost for college students, especially if you're doing it on a college campus, right, it's to walk to the lab. So the opportunity cost for students is often pretty low, both in terms of their reservation wage and in terms of the difficulty of getting to the experiment itself. Now, artefactual lab experiment, I crossed off what's different on the slide here, right? It's not with students. It's with a more broad-based population. That's one difference. Because of that, of course, the participation fees no longer necessarily low or reasonable, given you're dealing with adults who have to, college students are adults, I know, but you're dealing with a sample of people, throughout all ages, or maybe not all ages, but certainly just not selectively a student sample. Given this, it can be pretty expensive sometimes. The opportunity cost for somebody to drive to wherever this is being held and then for an hour of their time, it can be pricey. So it's with non-students, it's often high. The third thing the other difference I'll throw in, recruiting fees in an artefactual lab experiment can be sizable. They can be as expensive as the experiment itself in some cases, because you've got to find people. So in this way, it'll depend on kind of what you're doing. If you're doing something where anybody in the population should be just fine, maybe it's not too expensive. If you're putting ads out and offering money for people to participate. If you want more of a random phone book type sample, right, you're going to pay for that. That's going to be expensive. If you want a subset of the population, for example, I've done these before only looking for smokers. Well, smokers make up only a percentage of the population, which means when 80% of the population is out automatically, it gets more expensive to find and recruit the remaining, the subset of the population that's willing to show up to the experiment. So the recruiting fees can be sizable. I've seen in a grant proposal, I've once budgeted $80 per participant to recruit. Doesn't always, or quite frankly, usually cost quite that much. But it can be, by no means should you assume that's going to be cheap in an artifactual lab experiment. A framed field experiment is quite a bit different. So I've done a number of framed field experiments. Where I have usually done these is in a grocery store, and it's been selling food products or cigarettes. So it's a setting where purchasing decisions are made. Now, we're calling it a framed field experiment, right? It's out in the field, but participants know they're taking part in something a little different here, right? Because they're showing up to a table at a grocery store and they're saying we'll pay people for participating, right? They know this isn't normal, and that's where this differs from, other field experiments where people don't even know they're part of the experiment itself. But usually it's non-students, general population. There's less control. I've had cases where people have come through and one person participated, there was literally 7 children with her. So one person had to run the experiment and the other had to kind of keep the kids entertained. Other people, friends might be walking by while somebody's in the middle. Hey, what are you doing? I thought this was a scam. And you've got to deal with that, right? I mean, so there's a little bit less control. The flip side, though, it's much more of a normal situation for these types of decisions. When you do this, you usually just intercept people as they come through. Like if you're at a grocery store, you got a table out that's offering money for participants to make whatever, 15 or 20 bucks for 15 or 20 minutes of their time, right? Something like that. But because you're paying $15 or $20, and like if you're at a grocery store, right, they do not want you keeping people forever in there. You've got to keep it shorter. So you've got to make some hard choices about what you are going to do because you need to get done in a pretty quick amount of time. However, because of this, the participation fees can be quite low or reasonable. Once again, it deals with the participant's opportunity cost. If you're doing this at a farmer's market or a grocery store and you're intercepting people, they're already there. There's no travel costs and the length of time is much shorter. So 15 or 20 bucks might do it. And there's no recruiting fees. So the participation fees can be quite a bit lower. So when would you want to choose each experiment? Conventional experiment with students, I would say you should only be doing this if you're testing an auction theory. Unless you're dealing with a product that really you want to see how do college students react to what is their demand for a particular product, well, then maybe you could use it. But otherwise, you're not going to be able to generalize to the public at large if you're only using a sample of college students. So for a conventional lab experiment for auctions, I'd recommend only if you're looking to test a theory. If you're thinking, what would happen if we changed this thing in our auction design? How would people react? That's perfect for a conventional experiment. It's cheap to get the sample, and what you find likely is not an artifact of the age of the population and the fact that they're all college students. Or I do have a paper where it's looking at tobacco use, and we wanted to look specifically in younger people. Okay, well, college student sample is perfect for that, right? We collect 18 and 19-year-olds. Yeah, colleges have lots of them, right? That was fine for a conventional experiment. An artifactual experiment versus a framed, that's where you're using the general population. You're not just using college students. So the differences between those, if you need to do a lot of different treatments within a particular group and you need more time, you'll likely want to do the artifactual, you want to do the laboratory experiment, right? The lab experiment with adults or the artifactual field experiment. In a framed field experiment where you're intercepting people, you just simply don't have as much time. So in the trade-offs and what to consider, really, how much time do you need to conduct the experiment? And the flip side, what kind of budget do you have? If you have a low budget, just don't even consider the artifactual field experiment, because recruiting people is expensive, and the amount you have to pay for somebody to come in to do the experiment is going to be expensive. But if you have a large budget, then you could consider maybe a lab setting's better. I've had lab experiments where done, say, 6 or 8 rounds of bidding, like on different products. I've had lab experiments where we've shown TV commercials to participants, had them read information. Like, these are things that you could do there that are much tougher in the field experiment. So there's no necessarily right or wrong of these methods, but hopefully by kind of going through the videos, going through the options, some of the pluses and minuses of each of these, if you're considering an experiment, I'm hoping this is going to help you think about what might be best for your needs. Once again, my name is Matt Rousu from Susquehanna University, and thank you so much for watching.